Oh, here we go. Hello, hello. Check, check. One, two, three. We'll let some other people filter in right now. But I believe I'm live. I believe my bit rate is pretty good. I'm streaming over OBS, so I'm kind of checking my stats right now, making sure that everything is sounding okay. Are you guys hearing me okay? Leave a note in the chat. All right. Loud and clear, according to Patrick Nan. Thanks for joining. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Uh, there have been we've had a lot of action talks episodes lately. That's kind of like the big the big thing that's been happening on the channel. Constant every week, one episode. And it's been a ton of work, but it's been very very fulfilling personally. Um, we also started doing shorts, the little vertical shorts, because apparently the YouTube algorithm likes having the vertical shorts. Um, I don't quite understand that, and it actually takes quite a bit of work to make those too. Um, but what I've noticed is that like the view count for Action Talks has actually dropped off kind of precipitously. And we used to get a thousand views in an episode pretty rapidly, and now it's like 500. I don't know what's going on exactly. I don't know if it's just not being pushed by YouTube, or if people are just losing interest. I'm not quite sure what's going on. But um, you know, the numbers are the numbers, and so we have a few more episodes in the bank, and I think we got like between 5 and 8 right now in the bank. I wanted to release 52 for this first season. Might get a few more than that, just to demonstrate that we could do like one episode per week for our first year of the podcast. And that is, let me fix my light. I don't have any light. There we go. There we go. Um, so, and like I said, it's been intellectually fulfilling. It's been personally very fulfilling for me too, because it gives me a chance to talk to filmmakers, stunt performers, designers, artists, game developers, and get to know them, get into their heads a little bit, maybe talk about things that, maybe they haven't really talked about. I find that very fulfilling. I've gotten to know people very well, and I stay in contact with most all the people that I've talked to so far, and that's been extremely fulfilling. And also what I derive then from talking to guests, for the first 10 episodes, maybe 20 episodes, I was really trying to get my guests to say things because I went in with I had a theory that I wanted to test about movement and language, right? I'd done video essays leading up to this about this very topic, and uh, and so I would try and get the guests to talk about that stuff when they didn't want to a lot of the time, and I could kind of tell that this is not the way that you're supposed to interview people. The way that you're supposed to interview people is, well, there's a lot of ways to do it, but trying to fish answers out of them is not the right way. And I needed to find my own way to do it. And so I sort of took like a more personal approach. I would start with the big project and then kind of work back, work forward, and I didn't really set an agenda really. But overall that seemed to relax the mood quite a bit, and it made it easier for me to come up with questions too. And and then what I was able to derive from that and what I was able to learn, because I wasn't going in with any preconceived notions. Later episodes, I just kind of go in with a blank slate. Of course, I research the guest. I spend sometimes hours doing that, but I don't really I don't really assume anything anymore. I don't really assume that the guest is going to agree with me about anything, and as a result, I learned a lot more. And I think that that is a good podcast is when the host learns. And of course, when the audience learns too. And I hope that you all are getting as much out of it as I am. That said, though, it's been a huge amount of work. Um, I have an editor, a co-editor, Phil, who's my employee also, and he's also a stuntman. And he's been editing like crazy for months. And he's not the one who actually puts them together. Like we have, I have 10 or so editors. Some of you are out there right now, who actually do the editing and put these things together. And because it's so much work, it's like a ridiculous amount of work to put all the reference clips in, title them. I ask people to do between, a clip every minute to 3 minutes. And, much as these are little works of art, these are like documentaries each time. They take so much time. And I think after season one, I have to take a break. I want to bring it back. I want it to be better. I want to be able to actually make money doing this because I'm losing money doing the podcast, and I can't really do that right now. I've been through a lot personally in the past 6 months, and not in the game of burning my money on passion projects anymore. Um, Even if those passion projects pay off years later, I just can't afford to do that. So what I want to do is put it on hold, maybe get a sponsor, maybe somebody who will buy it. I don't know. Again, we're going to have 52 episodes at least after season one, and hopefully someone uh, gets interested in the podcast, wants to help out, and maybe we re-strategize. I don't know. I would like to do more in person for the next season. Ideally, all of them in person, but that means you have to fly people, put them in a hotel. It's expensive. Um, so anyway, that's the current state of action talks. Um, what I what I will plan on doing for this next year after Action Talks season one finishes is going back to doing more action essays. I'm not quite sure exactly how I want to approach these. I'm gonna take a side note right now. I recently got this really scary set of emails from a company called Pickwrites. And what Pickwrites does is it represents media companies and copyright holders. So, like a company like whatever, ZeniMax, right, will own rights to various pictures. So what Pickwrites does is it scours the internet, tries to find when people have used these pictures without permission. Probably, I don't even know like what their criteria is, but basically if you're using their picture without permission, they'll send you an email saying you owe X number of dollars for using it, and you need to take it down. So even if you take it down, you still owe money. And I got hit with 4 of these things. And each one of these, just without divulging, details, tends to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars, each one. And so it sort of I'm fighting them. I'm going to fight it. I'm not in the stage of life anymore where I back down from things like this. I really don't care because these are fair use, and I'm just going to fight that. If I have to get a lawyer, I will. Um, but it sort of made me think that companies like Pickwrites, they don't sit there and type out an individual email. They just have a program that they run. It's really simple, and I could make this program if I wanted to also. You basically have a database, right? You have your database. You have a database of 10 million photos, and you search based on that photo. You can use Google image search. It has this function in it. Use Google image search. It'll find all instances of that image being used, right? And then just write a script that says if you find that, click on the link, and then find an email on there, or ping me when you find it, and I'll find the email, whatever it is. and then send this template email with these template documents, and it all just kind of gets populated from a database. And I mean, if you send out 10,000 of these things a day, and if two people respond, then you're talking about getting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars each day from people who are, are scared of legal language, and these people are legit. And so at first I got scared. I thought, oh, I'll just pay it. I'll just pay it. I can afford it. I'll just pay it. And then I, I don't know. There's just like I don't know. I think I'm kind of in a different stage of my life now, where I don't like just kind of backing down anymore. So yeah, I think Patrick Nance saying that fair use is my strongest defense, and yeah, it's absolutely that. Every instance of using these four pictures was fair use, right? Where I was just doing something educational. It was never to sell something. It was never to claim that the image was mine. It was never modifying the image, right? So I have a good case, and it's just a different, when it hits your email and you see that they want you now for thousands of dollars, right? And you just go, okay, I just kind of have to trust that I can fight this. So that's what I'm gonna do. Um, so with that in mind, that got me thinking that if it's so easy to write a script like this, and people pick writes and other in these other, they call them copyright trolls. Uh, they call them that. They've been doing this for years before AI. So if they were able to do it without AI, imagine what they could do with AI. What could you do to scare people on YouTube, social media? I mean, somebody actually got sued on social media for posting a picture on social media. I think that they were acquitted, but you have to go through the hassle of doing this, right? And so I imagine that the ones who are going to be writing the most intense algorithms using AI are going to be these legal companies, right? These law firms. And these are just people that can operate with like a two-person company at that point. And so you could very easily make, I assume, an AI sort of, search the entire internet for all instances of this idea and just like send them legal letters anyway. And yeah, exactly. ChatGPT response emails. Like, uh, I mean, just the same, you could probably use AI to craft responses to these people, but the average person is not going to want to do that. The average person is just going to get scared. So that makes me then think like, okay, well, how should I approach doing action essays? Because two of the three action essays that I did were demonetized. Right now, YouTube, fortunately, um, has its own way of dealing with this. Right, so if you post a video on YouTube, you're sort of under the umbrella, the protective umbrella of YouTube, so that if you put something copyrighted in your video, I don't know. My understanding is that these companies can't go after you for that. No idea though. What if that changes? Don't know. What if YouTube changes its terms of service and they send 800-page PDF? They're like, yeah, here's a new TOC. When you sign this off, you can go back to uploading videos, and you go, oh yeah, sure, whatever. I'm not going to read that, obviously. And then maybe within that, there's something in there that says, by the way, if you upload copyrighted stuff, we can't protect you. I don't know. Like, it could happen. This is the issue with like being on a platform and having terms of service. It's so I don't know. So that makes me think like, well, maybe I should be very careful about how I do action essays. Um, Maybe I shouldn't put any reference video in the action essays. So that might be an approach that I need to take when doing future action essays. They're not going to be as fun to watch, but what I would do instead is link to videos in the description. And that way I 10 years in the future, like one of these pick rights things, they're trying to get me for a blog post 12 years ago. It's a 12-year-old blog post, right? Using like a picture from like a logo from Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival. Uh, so yeah, well, what if there's like a YouTube video from 15 years ago that has copyrighted stuff in it, and they go, oh yeah, that's that you've been making, I don't know, you have no right to use that. Maybe they ding you for maybe they ding you for your your ad money that you derived from it. I don't know. Anyway, it's like this world we're going into is very different. There's no need to fear. There is cause to be vigilant. Um, so I want to talk more about AI, but it's going to be in reference to something else. Okay. Um, some of the action essays that I'm interested in tackling in the future. So I I have children, and they love the Pixar Cars series, the movies, the three films. And I think I've now watched uh, I've watched these Pixar Cars films probably about 80 times each. So I know them very well. Uh, and uh, and I think that whenever you watch anything 80 times, you end up, kind of becoming an expert on it, or you see something kind of interesting in it. Um, and it's also like one of the things that we watched probably 80 times was the canal chase scene from Terminator 2. There's the Robin Hood Disney animation. But I thought I would talk briefly about Cars, um, and some kind of interesting things in Cars that I've noticed because Eric Price is here too. He's a good friend of mine. Eric Price and I love talking about Cars because he hates Cars 2, loves Cars 1 and 3. I love Cars 2. I also like Cars 1 and 3. Uh, we'll get into that, but the sort of like broader analysis of Cars is that okay, Cars 1 is clearly made by somebody who loves car culture, John Lasseter. John Lasseter is a, middle Californian, kind of like the same geography that I'm from. He has Click and Clack, the Tapper brothers, who play the Rusty's salesman, and those guys did Car Talk, which is something that my dad would listen to every Sunday. I knew Car Talk very well, um, and so and obviously the NASCAR aesthetic and the NASCAR love of the film is very obvious when you watch this movie. And I think that that's one of the reasons that the film has been so successful. Whereas, something like Talladega Nights, which I haven't seen, I assume Talladega Nights kind of like makes fun of this culture. Cars doesn't make fun of the racing culture. Like, yeah, it pokes some fun at some characters in there, but Lightning McQueen is not a caricature of a NASCAR driver the way that Ricky Bobby is, right? Even the name is like it's a caricature, right? That's like its own kind of comedy. That's Will Ferrell's thing. But like with Cars, I think that the reason that Cars resonated so well is because you hit all of America with this story. Small town America, big city America, the entire gamut, and really internationally too, in a sense, which is probably the goal of Cars too. One of the things that I found very strange, though, after watching Cars a few times, is that these small towns in California, and keep in mind that Pixar is a Bay Area company. I used to live across the street from them in Emeryville. I lived on 43rd Street, and they were on like near on San Pablo and just north of 43rd is the Pixar. The Pixar, I guess they call it the campus. And I remember one summer they were digging out there, and there was just a drill, just going bang, bang all day, every day as they were adding onto that campus. I think that was around the time Disney bought them. At any rate, so Pixar is a very sort of like in the middle of California company, and so you can again you can tell with Lasseter, for example, that he kind of has a love for car culture, and he probably has a love for small town America too. And actually, in Emeryville, just down the street, there's a I think it's on 40th or maybe 41st. In San Pablo, there's actually a car garage with a bunch of classic cars, and now I'm wondering if that's his. I remember going in there once, and going like, this is the strangest thing. So, yeah, it's kind of this like weird area where, north meets south. Because when you go north of the Bay Area in California, it's just Hicktown. That's where I'm from. I'm from near Oregon. And like it's all Okies up there, right? It's like small town, companies, family-owned companies, and of course Walmart, which is putting them out of business, which is kind of part of what I'm going to talk about. So Pixar is sort of that like that mesh of North and South, right? Whereas in LA, you're kind of like far from real NorCal culture. You're kind of far from the love of NASCAR. I don't know how many people in LA watch NASCAR, but my dad used to watch NASCAR every Sunday, and I'd sit and watch, and I, watch a few dozen laps with him. So I kind of understand. Or we'd go to the drag races too, the drag strip. Um, and of course destruction derbies, funny cars, everything. We do all those things, and that's all like very Northern California stuff, and monster trucks too. Every now and then when I could get away with it. So you kind of get that with Radiator Springs and cars, but here's something that's kind of strange about cars, is that when we go to Radiator Springs, what I would expect to find is a culture that is um, very, I'm going to say skip ads for right now. Looks like it wants to put ads up. I'm not interested in making money right now, even though I owe thousands of dollars apparently. Um, Radiator Springs, which is kind of like predicate, it's kind of like based on, as if like a small town on Route 66, right? But because the freeway's been built, nobody goes on these small highways anymore, so the town is losing business, right? So it's kind of fallen off the map. And so when McQueen goes to Radiator Springs, he meets Tomater. He gets impounded because he broke the statue and tore up the streets. And Tomater, you would expect, is a racing fan. You would expect a small town watches NASCAR every Sunday the way that my dad did. A small town would listen to Click and Clack every Sunday on Car Talk the way my dad did, the way that everybody in Northern California does. But instead, when you meet Tomater, he has no idea who Lightning McQueen is. He's got this NASCAR racing car in his impound lot with a number on the side, and he has no idea who he is. And McQueen actually asks Tomater, "Do you know who I am?" And Tomater has the weirdest response. It's like out of character. Tomater says, "No. Is your name Tomater too?" Well, what kind of a response is that? Like, it actually sounds as though maybe Lasseter at some point was being very realistic, or whoever the writer was, right? It's not just Lasseter in charge of these. A lot of people make these movies, right? Might have been the writer. Who knows? Maybe the script had a Tomater character who knew who Lightning McQueen was and had to hide him there so that the press and media didn't find him, whatever it might be. And then they had to change it so that the town didn't know who Lightning McQueen was. The only person in town who knows who Lightning McQueen is Doc, who's the judge. Right? He's the one that gives Lightning McQueen community service and has him fix the road with Bessie. So my guess is that, and by the way, Doc is played by Paul Newman. It was one of the last roles that he did. He died after that, so he's not in Cars 2. I wonder if Paul Newman was attached later, and they had to make a character for him. And they put him in Doc, and they made Doc this sort of like guardian of Radiator Springs, and they had to make everybody else in Radiator Springs ignorant of racing culture, and that's just very strange. Even though they've got a radio, they've got a TV somewhere. I think they have like a little TV somewhere. And this just does not represent small town America. It doesn't look like small town America at all. Small town America is a bunch of people sitting in front of a TV watching Fox News and NASCAR. They know pop culture. They are deep within pop culture. It's their pop culture. It's different, right? But they have their own graphic design style. They have like their own thing. That's probably, I mean, you're kind of well, I won't get into that. But so this idea that like Radiator Springs has been cut off from mass media because it's cut off from the road is very strange. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but this is like a massive plot hole, right? Which gets resolved in the next one when like now they have mass media, and even at the end of Cars, they're watching and listening, or I guess they're just listening to McQueen on the racetrack. I guess for the first time they're listening to a race. So that's something funny that I noticed about Cars 1. Uh, and then Cars 2, the best film of the series, obviously. Uh, what I love about that is that you can tell that Pixar knew they had a hit with Mater, and like what better thing to like make Mater go international, right? Total fish out of water story. That's why I love it. I think a lot of people are disappointed that Cars 2 is not about racing. Racing is sort of like taking a back seat to the broader narrative, which is about, this like conspiracy to undermine alternative fuels, right? Um, and then and so, all that, the action in Cars 2 is incredible. It's like got some of the greatest action scenes in any animated film because they're so like truthful, right? Um, Finn McMissile, he just uses his gadgets. Tomater, he punches a few dudes with his tires, but he uses his rocket packs. He's really good at going backwards. So it's just like good sort of like I call it like good use of modifiers, and the and McQueen is just sort of like in the background of the whole thing, which is fine. My kid, kids who love McQueen, they don't seem to mind watching Mater, but I think a lot of the time they might have wanted to see more of a racing film. Um, and so the Cars 2 just comes across as like a very sort of like standard sequel, a standard high quality sequel. It kind of deviates from the formula. Cars 3, and I think Cars 2 got bad ratings. I don't think the audience disapproved, but I think the press did. But in Cars 3, it kind of goes back to being a race film, but it's about McQueen getting too old, and so he gets replaced by what's her face, Rose. I can't remember her name. And what I thought was kind of an interesting meta narrative for all three Cars films is this is me putting kind of a conspiracy theory hat on, but it makes you wonder what Cars would have been like without Disney. Because is it possible that through Disney's influence, yeah, Cruz Ramirez, that was her name. Is it possible that with Disney's influence, they were pushing Cars not toward a female-led thing, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but away from the small town, right? So if you think about the resolution to Cars 1, the resolution to Cars 1 is that the town gets restored, right? People start coming to the town. And that's like a very heartfelt, very heartwarming ending to that film. And you get the impression that, you know, the team making Cars really wanted the small town to succeed. And the way I study kinship now is very much about like I'm really looking at how cities function and how kinship functions within cities. So if you have matrilineal systems where inheritance goes through the mother, biological fatherhood is not quite as valued. Instead, the mother's children have a closer relationship with her brother, and he's often called the father, whereas the biological father is like not really around. The biological father moved in most likely from like a neighboring tribe. He speaks kind of a different dialect. You don't really interact with him too much. Um, and then the men from the mother's tribe, they go and they marry into that guy's tribe, right? So there's this like cross pollination of of tribes that go and like intermarry together, and that sort of prevents the two from going to war. Reading this really interesting book called Ancient Society by this is Henry Louis Morgan, I think is his name. Lewis H. Morgan, excuse me, Lewis Henry Morgan. Ancient Society, or Researches in the Lines of Human Progress from Savagery Through Barbarism to Civilization. Yes, he speaks like a man from 1877. He uses the word savage. It's offensive, but I'm not reading it for his opinions. I'm reading it for his data. And he obviously has his own idea of what constitutes a good society, what constitutes civilization, right? And to him, there's like seven stages of society. There's low savagery to middle to high savagery, and then there's low barbarism to high barbarism, and middle high barbarism, and then you have civilization. And civilization is, the Greeks, the Romans, America, right? Europe, and but like high barbarism, low to high barbarism, he puts the Iroquois Confederacy in there. And what he says, to his credit, he says basically that when you are in like high barbarism, well, that Greek and Roman culture also, or Greek and Roman political society came from high barbarism. It all, it came from a tribal system. And so it only makes sense that the Iroquois Confederacy will at some point attain, this like um, high notion of civilization, right? Um, Now, again, I'm not saying that I agree with his analysis, but I do appreciate how he approaches the way that societies are constructed based on their kinship systems. Now, the Iroquois and a lot of Native Americans were matrilineal, and so they had these systems that intermarried between them, right? So, like the Iroquois Confederacy had five tribes at first that grew to six. Each one of those tribes had totem groups within each one, and all five of the original tribes all had a wolf totem. And I think a lot of them also had bear, etc. Right? So if you're in the Confederacy, then if you're a wolf totem, then a wolf from another tribe in the Confederacy is your brother. Even though he speaks like a different dialect, he's your brother. So but if you're in a different tribe, then if there's war between your two tribes, you're probably going to vote against the war. So it was this natural sort of check against warfare within the Confederacy. Now, of course, they'd go in war with other people. Iroquois loved going to war with other people. Um, the Mohawk tribe within the Iroquois were, especially in favor of going to war with America. For example, the Mohawk and the Seneca were very much in favor of war with America, but because the Iroquois Confederacy you had to do a unanimous vote, then they couldn't get the unanimous vote to go to war with America, so they decided, okay, well, every tribe, to each his own, they can go to war if they want, and the rest is history. Now, the more important thing here, the more interesting thing here, is to look at how the society is sort of constructed when it's based in a matrilineal system, as it is in this Iroquois Confederacy. Well, when you have a matrilineal system, you have to sort of like, it's very hard to imagine how this works, because I'm pretty sure pretty much none of us are in matrilineal systems. There might be a few out there who are still in matrilineal totem groups, but I doubt they're in the chat. And so the way that it works is that when you have these cross pollinations of marriages, right? A man will go to this culture, and this man will go to this, or to this tribe, and this man will go to this tribe. It sort of strengthens those bonds. It's going to prevent war. The more that you can do that with other tribes, the less war you're going to have. Well, just as people travel to marry, the men travel to marry, their inheritance doesn't actually go to their biological children. Their inheritance has to go back to where they came from, right? Their inheritance actually, whatever they acquire, it's going to be inherited by their sisters' children. Their sisters stay in the original tribe, right? So anything that a man acquires has to be transferable back to his sister at home. So if he builds a house, you have to like take the house apart and transport it back. So like, why even build it, right? So let alone, a wall, a city, some kind of fortification. There wasn't really a point to doing it unless the fortification in the city was like held in the tribal trust. It wasn't built, right? Because there was no incentive to pass down that inheritance. So as a result, matrilineal systems don't really have many large buildings. Like, of course, they have the lodges. Of course, they have, the whatever dwellings that they have to live in. But when you can't pass down your dwelling to your biological son, then what incentive do you have to build it up? And your son isn't going to build it up for you. Okay, so that's a matrilineal system. So the cost of it is you cannot build big cities. It's very difficult. The only way you can build a big city, and this is how they kind of hack this in Egypt, is that if you're in a matrilineal system, well, if a brother marries his own sister, then because the sister is the one who gives the inheritance to her biological children, then his inheritance, his property goes to his biological children. That's how they sort of hacked it. And the Egyptians justified this by saying, yeah, well, we're gods, so we're allowed to do that. um, and there are other examples too. Fraser's Totemism and Exogamy records a bunch of these, but it tends to be um, a royal kind of prerogative. And that's in order to create a city or to make a temple, right? Or to build some kind of strong, um, like a large building, for example. And then your generation after generation can build onto it. Okay, so that's matrilineal. And the benefit is that you get very strong tribal networks, so very low chance of going to war with your neighbors. It's kind of nice. Uh, and then I've gone over this a bunch, and I'm not gonna try and be too long in the tooth with this. Eric has heard me speak about this at length. Uh, but in a patrilineal system, which I think a lot more of us are familiar with, the father hands down his property to his biological children. Um, in early patrilineal systems, the wife would be the one who would come into the town. Um, There are various reasons for this. A lot of the time it's to avoid marrying your cousin. In Europe, it was a way to avoid marrying your sixth cousin, which for some reason the church decided that you shouldn't marry your sixth cousin, which if you have a town of 300 people, like you can't marry anybody. So you have to bring somebody in. How do you do that? It's really difficult, right? There are various incentives at play there to try and funnel inheritance into certain people's hands, but we won't get into that. Uh, so, but with patrilineal descent, the benefit of that is obviously that if you have a small house, you give it to your son, he can build onto that house, right? And if he has brothers, maybe they can build houses as well, and everybody can just kind of stay there. And after 5 generations, you could build a city. And this is exactly what we see. This is exactly what we see starting with around the Bronze Age, um, especially in the Iron Age. But I think that this is what you start seeing with this move towards what's called agnatic kinship. And that allows you to build up your property, build up your inheritance, build up your city. And if you can combine that with warfare, as they did, now you have sort of like the beginning of a city-state. Okay, so what that means is that as soon as a patrilineal system moves next door to a matrilineal system, that matrilineal system has to either destroy that patrilineal system or become patrilineal itself and become basically an enemy or exchange wives again, right? But basically a patrilineal system, if you were to imagine, I wish I had like this isn't a great example. But let's imagine that, you know, it's kind of like kinship in the matrilineal society is like this mesh, right? And the more connections that you have between tribes, then the stronger that mesh is, right? And the less likely it is that anybody is going to go to war, right? And destroy those networks. Well, the minute you have something else show up, it starts to kind of put an impression on that kinship system. Because how does a patrilineal guy marry with a matrilineal female? Right? Or vice versa. You can't, because the patrilineal system is going to give its inheritance to its children, and anyone who marries from the matrilineal system into the patrilineal system also has to give their inheritance to the patrilineal system. So the patrilineal side wins no matter what. So this is why you probably see instances of this cropping up a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of what's this guy's name? He's the guy that wrote writes all about like ancient sphinxes and ancient societies. I can't remember his name. He's been on Rogan. He's got a Netflix show. And a lot of people call him a hack, but I'm not sure because it seems like he's trying to find these super societies in the ancient world and trying to understand why these societies, like how could they have been so big, why they've been forgotten, and what happened to them. And it's possible that like you have examples of these patrilineal systems and these matrilineal mesh networks next door, basically, and the patrilineal system tries to destroy it, but these guys are just too big in the matrilineal system, and they can crush the patrilineal system or take them all captive, whatever it is, right? So you probably have a lot of these like. You have maybe like five, six, seven generations of people building up a city, but then the matrilineal system just still happens to be big enough to topple that sometimes. But what you see at the end of the Bronze Age during the catastrophe is that these patrilineal systems started getting too big. They started getting too strong, and they got bronze and they got iron. And there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening here, but basically what happened is that Iron Age society basically was almost entirely patrilineal, and it just wiped matrilineal systems off the map. So you see it with Greece, you see it with Rome, and at that time you see it with Israel, um, and later on Arabia too. Islam is sort of like the recording of like the lower parts of the peninsula, basically, like becoming patrilineal because before then they had been matrilineal. All right, so what does this have to do with cars? Well, think about what a patrilineal system does in America, for example, or in any place that has cities. Well, a patrilineal system means that if you start a business, you can hand it down to your son or your daughter. I mean, we have in Europe and in America, we have kind of a bilateral system where both children can inherit, and we sort of trace kinship to both sides. So we're not really strictly patrilineal. There is more of a bilateral system. But in the South, and especially in the plantation South before the Civil War, things were pretty much patrilineal. Um, and that's kind of an interesting parallel much later in the American South, which is that in the plantation South, who owned the slaves, and again, those were passed down through the agnatic line from father to son, right? So you had this like buildup of estates, but in the Northeast, in New England, that was a manufacturing economy, that was bilateral, and it was also very corporate, and so you basically have a system where the corporate, and that is a kinship in a sense, like a corporate kinship style, where you trace your lineage to both sides, so you have like twice the alliances, whereas in the American South, it's very much like on the father's side. And I think an interesting study would be like how the kinship of this kind of like corporal lineal Northeast beat the patrilineal in the South, because ultimately, if you're corporal lineal, your capital is liquid, right? So you can move things around much more quickly. Whereas in the South, like they're sort of like stuck in their cities. It's not what happened in the North. That's not like a manufacturing, industrialized kinship system. An industrialized kinship system means that you're actually not tied to the land anymore. You're not tied to a city. You can just like liquidate and move, right? And by the way, it ruined a lot of people's lives. Obviously, not everybody likes this system, but the proponents of it, especially in like the sort of like liberal economic circles or the Austrian economic circles, would say that, well, this overall improves everybody's well-being because like it reduces prices, right? And that was exactly what was going on in the Northeast, right? Is that they wanted lower prices. I'm getting ahead of myself. Bottom line is this, right? In America, you still have these small towns all the time, which have these family-owned businesses. Father passes down to son, and then what happens? It's like classic story. You have the lumber mill, you have the small, tannery, whatever it is. Walmart moves in, and what happens to the tannery? It goes under, right? Unless it has some like crazy social media campaign, they can kind of stay afloat for another generation. So with the corporate style of, I would call it kinship, but you could just call it like the corporation moving in to small town America, you do have kind of an end to patrilineal systems, because patrilineal systems just can't compete with the capital flow. They can't compete with the prices, and this is nobody's fault. This is sort of something that's been going on for like 500 years, really. As soon as you had mobile cannons, and as soon as you were able to transport munitions, right? You have the establishment of corporations that are going to make capital as liquid as possible in order to move munitions, in order to move money, whatever it takes, in order to build up states. And so this is not like some evil man in like 1850 or something who created all of this, but this is something that's just been sort of structurally happening for the past 500 years. You can even see traces of it in like Catholic monasticism. Buddhist monasticism is like kind of a corporate system. Won't get into that right now. So in a small town like Radiator Springs, you have, what is basically a bunch of probably patrilineal businesses that have been handed down generation to generation, and those are faltering. All right, so now we're back to cars. So Pixar kind of sort of represents this small town vibe. And the without a doubt, the acquisition that Disney acquiring Pixar, it would have changed that a little bit, right? Because Pixar is it is kind of this local company in the Bay Area, even though it's a corporation, but it's a California company. It, the Cars is a California movie. You can say it's also a Florida movie, but it's kind of a California movie when I look at it. Even like, there are even elements in Cars 3 that are very California, like the destruction derby. The part where the guy says like, "Hey, no cussing, it's family night." These cars are riding around with chainsaws and stuff, and it's family night. It's like, yeah, man, that's totally NorCal. The whole thing is very California. But then when you get bought, you get acquired by Disney, which is not a California company. Disney is a global company. Disney thinks globally. It thinks in a very corporal lineal way. So you can kind of see how Disney would start to influence this. Maybe they had a preference at Pixar for these small town kind of stories. Disney is going to say like, yeah, okay, but we need to make it bigger. Everything's got to be bigger now, right? Because that's what the international audience cares about. And that's also where Disney stockholders, that's kind of how they think. They think in a very liquid capital way. Now, if Pixar was owned by a bunch of car buffs who had their own mechanic shops and they all came from gearhead families and all this, you guarantee you Cars 3 would have been very different. But instead, what Cars 3 is, what happens is that McQueen starts to get dominated by these like new race cars that have like very high tech training gear, right? Um, and uh, and so he loses outright to, I can't remember his name, the new guy, the rookie. And so Rusty's his sponsor. They sell to this big Silicon Valley billionaire, right? And I say Silicon Valley, and yeah, Silicon Valley is in California, but Silicon Valley, like I worked there. I worked there for 5 years. Silicon Valley is not like it's not a California feeling place. It's very different there, and it's like San Francisco in general. It's like nowadays, especially in the corporate culture, it's not. It doesn't feel like California at all. It feels like something way bigger, right? It feels like something very global, and like we can stay here, we can leave tomorrow. This is like the mindset of kind of like Silicon Valley. It's like, yeah, we're here. We can leave tomorrow if we have to. They don't root in local community. They kind of do, but you're not really going to root locally if your interests are everywhere, right? If your interests are local, you'll root locally, but that tends to not be the case. So it seems as though Cars 3 might be making some kind of like underhanded commentary about being acquired by Disney. I could be totally wrong about this, but the they don't make it about Disney. They make it about a Silicon Valley billionaire buying their company, buying Rusty's, buying the small town company, right? Uh, so is that not basically what happened when Disney bought Pixar, acquired Pixar? Is that not what happened? Seems to me that pretty close analogy of what happened. And so what happens later in the story is that, McQueen, he trains, it turns out he's just not, he doesn't quite have what it takes, right? And he gets replaced by his trainer, Cruz Ramirez. Um, and I'm not going to talk at all about like, I don't think that this is like some female empowerment move or anything like that. There might have been some decision there where somebody said we should have a female take the lead, but it's like, yeah, it actually, I don't think that that's actually like the point of what's happening. The point of what's happening is that control is being taken away from local and being subsumed under this like global thing. So whether or not it was, female, they could have made him a Chinese guy that spoke no English. Could have easily done that. It would have been the same narrative. And so if Cars 3 might be a commentary about being acquired by Disney. Maybe not, but the action's good too. So that is what I have to say about Cars. Okay, let me take some questions here. Let's see. Okay, I'm going way back here. Let's see. Diogo asked if I have any books on Kenjutsu styles. No, I don't really have many martial art books. In fact, martial art books tend to be like, I think they're kind of low quality. Um, Man, there's this one. This one, like, I actually remember, like, buying this a long time ago when I was a kid. The Shaolin Grandmaster's Text, History, Philosophy, and Gong Fu of Shaolin Chan, which is like related to Zen Buddhism. And it just sort of like repeats the same myths that we keep hearing about animal styles and how the patriarchs of these animal styles went and watched praying mantises move and then took that and like derived their martial arts from it. I just don't buy any of it, but you can watch my action essay number 2 about that. Excuse me, it's a movement language 2, action essay 5 about the ritual origins of the Hong Kong style. I don't buy that at all. So, and a lot of the time, like these books are kind of made to sell a lineage. They're made to sell a school, and the lineages, especially when it comes from China, those lineages, in my opinion, like nobody knows. Like every Hung Gar practitioner has like their own story. Watch Mark Houghton's interview that I did on Action Talks. He talks about Lao Gaolong, Pops. Pops talks about like the origin of Wing Chun and how there was a woman that captured a goat between her legs, and in order to fight the horns of the goat, she had to do like bong sao lop sao, right? And he told Mark this story, and Mark said, "Wow, that's fascinating." And Lao Garlong says, "Do you believe it?" And Mark says, "Well, yeah." And Lao Garlong says, "I just made it up. It could be anything." And I think that that's generally like the case with a lot of Chinese martial arts, is that nobody really knows the ancestry, and nobody really knows the lineage of a lot of these things. Without a doubt, I'll put money on this. They came from sorcery. They came from matrilineal totem clans. A lot of the stuff that's like you see in like Seven Star, which is astrology. I think a lot of the snake stuff is probably old voodoo, and this is so taboo to talk about because, like in America, we're sort of afraid of ascribing superstitious causes to things that we revere, right? So like we think that kung fu is this like great and noble thing, and it is. Um, and there's all this health to it and all this, and there's all this internal chi and there's medicine associated with it, right? But like all of that is sort of a product of like the Jingwu era, just after the first revolution, the revolution in China, and then it really got cleaned up where they wanted to kind of scrub the record of all the sorcery and all of the magic. They wanted to scrub all that stuff. They were trying to kind of keep up with the West. Because like in the West, we had sort of gotten rid of alchemy by like the 18th century, right? And we had chemistry, and we'd sort of gotten rid of astrology, and we had astronomy, right? And so China was trying to keep up, and that's why they had Christians in the capital in Peking, in Beijing, excuse me. Do you know why they call it Peking? I thought it was after the Cantonese pronunciation, which is Bucking, but no, Peking comes from the old way that they would transliterate in Mandarin, and Pei was pronounced Bei, and King was pronounced Jing. Anyway, silly. Glad it changed. That is one good thing of the of the communist state is that it finally standardized Mandarin pronunciation. Anyway, so they were trying to update and they were trying to get with the times. They wanted it to look scientific, just like the West, and they created a whole narrative around that. And of course, the West is going to look at that and they'll say, "Yeah, that's great, and we'll buy it and put it in Chinatown. We'll go to your, we'll do all your stuff." So a lot of the time, the books just sort of start from that, and they don't really have any interest in like looking deeply at where that stuff was before then. Like they kind of buy the burning of the South Shaolin Temple story. I don't know if it's a myth, but before Shaolin burned, if it even existed, um, like we don't really even know what the state of martial arts was before then. So anyway, watch the action essay. I talk a lot more about it there. And no, I don't really have any books on that karate system. The best one that I've seen, the best martial art book that I've read is um, the where is it? It's Teshu. It's about Teshu. Which one? Oh yeah, the Sword of No Sword. This was really good. I highly recommend this. This one's fantastic. Life of the Master Warrior Teshu. Read that one. Good stories in that one. All right, moving on. All right. Does he also believe you shouldn't violate Prime Directive? I don't even know what I was talking about. Sorry. Okay. Divina says investigate. Where was it? Investigate the persecution of the Amish by the IRS and other groups. Oh, very interesting idea. Um, yeah, I'm reading about Quakers right now also and kinship in America and the in early American in New England, right? This is a history of matrimonial institutions. This is like amazing scholarship that you just can't get stuff like this. I know I gloat a lot about this time period, but like this is 1904. There was this time period between like 1880, even 1860 is pretty good. Between 1860 and World War I, where the scholarship was so good, and if you can get past the invective, some of these guys, and some of them are like there's no invective for a lot of them. A lot of them are trying to really understand like natives. They're trying to understand, how like ancient societies really worked, and they're trying to, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt. Guys like Morgan, this guy, I mean, he's like, there's this part where he writes about the Iroquois. He's on the other side of the debate. He says the Iroquois are so civilized, even their brains are almost as large as our Aryan brains. It's unbelievable the stuff that they would say, um, like as if brain size like really matters, right? Because if brain size mattered, then elephants would be like way smarter than us. But anyway, so he writes about marriage and divorce in England and then in America. It's a two-part series. And in America, man, the Quakers had it bad. And if you're a Quaker, they didn't want you to marry in the Quaker way. And the Quakers were very simple, right? They didn't do like a very elaborate ceremony. Um, at the same time, the in the colonies at the time, so before the Revolution, before the Constitutional Convention, the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England, which is also called the Episcopalian Church. I had no idea. That was basically trying to run things a lot of the time in America. But in Connecticut, they had kind of like a free religion sort of system because you also had Puritans coming from the Netherlands, right? So you had this kind of like confluence of like Anglicans and Puritans and Protestants also from Germany, who are all trying to sort of figure out like the best way to live together and to make sure that everybody has, relatively similar freedoms. Didn't always work out that way. And a lot of the time, the Protestants, the Presbyterians especially, and the Anglicans would sort of like come out on top, and they both could hate on the Quakers together. Not a good time for Quakers. They call them the Friends. So I'd be very curious about how the IRS and how inheritance also factors all into Quaker lifestyles. Okay, let's see. Pandemics destroyed small family-owned businesses. Pandemics did. I think also what destroyed a lot of family-owned businesses is the fact that in small towns, they adopted the rules that cities were using. It doesn't make any sense, right? I live in Vegas. In Vegas, the default was to just adopt whatever rules were going on in California during the pandemic, and that's just not reality in the desert, right? Because it's very easy to stay separated from people in the desert. It's very easy. There's a lot of space here. Even though it's a city, there's a ton of space in Vegas. Aside from the strip, like you could have made COVID rules like California on the strip, and then you could have like relaxed them quite a bit once you get out of the strip. And again, the strip isn't even Las Vegas. The strip is called Paradise. That's a different city for tax reasons. You can kind of imagine why that happened. And so you could have just had like California COVID rules when you're in Paradise. Once you're out of Paradise, you can, relax a little bit. And that would have made way more sense in Vegas. So I think it is kind of an example of this corporalineal descent sort of taking over and imposing itself in cities where it's like not necessary. You don't have to. You don't have to have these rules. Um, and you see a lot of places sort of like realizing. And Vegas figured this out pretty quickly. It's like, oh, wait, we shouldn't. Why do we have California's rules? We're not California. We're just not. Um, we get a lot of traffic coming into here, from like other places, but all of that was like very easy to, you could have like very easily managed all that. Anyway, I won't get into COVID politics. That's over. That's why the Fast and Furious movies became global action thrillers. Yeah, this is kind of like the trend of everything. Um, I don't know when it was, but I was complaining. Well, that's every day, but I was complaining about the fact that no action films are about small personal issues anymore. It's very hard to find those. And every now and then you get like a Fassbender film like the Killer, right, where it's like very personal and it just takes off, right, and people love it. Um, and even like John Wick One, right? John Wick One is it is kind of a local film, although you're dealing with Russian gangsters. Um, but like John Wick's not trying to save the world. John Wick is trying to, they killed his dog, man. So, and then in John Wick 2, what happens? He goes to Italy, it's international, and now everybody's trying to kill him. And this is just like the natural kind of trend of every kind of storytelling. Because I don't know what the incentive is right now. Like, who knows how many voices kind of speak into that demand? Because, as soon as you say, like, "Hey, we're going to do John Wick 2, um, and had, Chad and Dave said, but this time um, he's going to defend his house from a bunch of, Russian gangsters who are coming back after him. Without a doubt, like a lot of people would have said, like, no, you have to make it go out now. You have to make it go bigger. But I don't know why you have to do that. I think people would have been like okay if John Wick had just gone somewhere else and then had a local problem there. But there is this like incentive. Like maybe it's because the people who make the decisions also invest in the company, so they kind of think in a corporate way. They think very much about liquid capital and very much about, well, we can just move things very quickly. So like when you just think like that all the time, then then you're not gonna root. So like John Wick's not gonna he's not gonna meet a woman. He's got to leave. But how much? I don't know. Like if I were to write John Wick 2, I would have been he meets a woman and he has to like root now. But you know, that's why I'm not in the movie market as much as Chad is, because Chad probably listened and like made millions of dollars. Clearly, he's the one who's wrong, though, right, Eric? Anyway, the thing is, like, this is kind of a complaint, but it's also I'll acknowledge that it's just reality. Um, but we all have to admit that, like, when a small town action film comes out, like, we all run to it. And I think that this is because it's kind of like the appeal of zombie movies, right? Because what are we dealing with every day? This is my intent load theory kind of at work here. What is sort of like loading on us every day, all day? Like, what are the five things? What are the five issues that you think are important right now? Right? What are the five main issues that you personally think are very important right now? The war in Israel, the war in Russia, the next elections, Social Security, immigration at the border, whatever it might be. Okay, if any one of those five actually influences you on a daily basis, then I think you can keep that one. Otherwise, you're sort of thinking about stuff that's happening in all these other places, and the only reason that you're thinking about it is because people are telling you to look there. I'm sorry, like this is me being kind of a misanthrope, but like a lot of global politics works like this. We open up the news feed, we look at, oh, I should be looking here, I should be looking at that, and I start thinking about all the other things that are kind of happening in the world outside of my control. Putin's doing this, Trump's doing that, and it's all stuff that I can't really do anything about. I mean, I can vote, but kind of like, well, you're not really going to change anything. Um, don't ban me, YouTube, for talking down to people. But like, no, that's not like the big crisis is kind of like out of your hands, right? And I think that the best Zen masters are the ones that kind of like retire to a cave and go like, oh yeah, I couldn't do anything about that. Putin, what am I going to do about him? So that's constantly, and look, I know I'm being hard on everybody, but if that's like what you're thinking about all the time is stuff that's happening far away from you, then your brain is sort of like out there all the time, right? If you know all that stuff really well, but you don't know your neighbor's name that lives next door to you, then maybe, but by the way, guilty. I had two neighbors and I don't know their names. I've lived there for months. I don't know their names. And I'll blame them though, because they never come out of the house. uh, but I know at least a few people on the street. Try to. But this is sort of like the modern world now, which is that you're inundated by stuff that is so far out of your control, right? So when that's your constant inundation, how do you resolve that? It's like really hard to resolve that. They'll show you ads and you can buy stuff and you can kind of like buy your way out of it on Amazon. But for the most part, you can't. And that's why I think zombie films are so cathartic, is because it finally brings you back to here and gives you something to care about that's like right next to you. Your kid, your food supply, your house, your dog, right? Your gun or your truck, right? It's like very simple, and people love that stuff because it kind of gets them out of this like super intent, like far away stuff that's always hitting us. I'm not saying that stuff's not important. It's not that you shouldn't pay attention to it, but you have to admit, like that is kind of where a lot of our attention goes. And that's not our fault. That's just like how it works. That's how the whole world's networked. That is the corporal lineal system. If you live in a patrilineal system, then you're kind of concerned about your church, your neighborhood, right? Maybe you're part of a neighborhood watch, right? You meet people when they move in, right? That's actual small town stuff. And if you're in a big city, you're probably never in that state. And that's just reality. All right, more questions. Oh my gosh, there's a lot. Uh, let's see. Yeah, I'll just read this last one. Again from Davina, asking a lot of good questions. Read The Road by McCarthy. If you haven't already, it's very focused on survival. It's a great book. It's a great book. Great movie too. It's very sad, but um, no, it's extremely. I guess that's like a very good cathartic pill that you could take if you're kind of feeling overwhelmed by social media and things that are going on all the time. Outrigger asks, do you have any advice on picking martial arts school for an 8-year-old? Something I've been thinking about a lot. Yeah, I don't know. Depends on how much your 8-year-old wants to get hit in the face. Some like it, some don't. So maybe start there. Uh, maybe maybe I don't know. Like, how does your kid perceive the world, right? Um, is your kid aggressive? Then like you should probably do something that's going to tamp that down. If he's not aggressive, then maybe you should do something where he can continue to be non-aggressive but still feel confident. Um, like how likely is it for him to get into an actual altercation? If it's low likelihood, then take a very symbolic system, right? But if you're in a city where like, or if he's in a like if you have him in a school where he's getting bullied a lot, like teach him jujitsu. It's probably why jujitsu is so damn expensive now, is because all these parents are like, well, this is actually the thing that's going to work. My kid's not going to get in trouble because he's not going to punch anybody. He's just going to hold him there until the teacher shows up. And So jujitsu schools are like, all right, then that'll be 180 bucks a month. It's crazy. Okay, let's see. Jackson is asking, what do you think? What is a cool action fighting style on screen? For example, kickboxing and BJJ. I mean, this is like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get in so much trouble. I think one of the worst ones is I'm gonna get in trouble. If you only do wushu, it's gonna look bad. There, I said it. If you only do wushu, it's gonna look bad. If you have other styles to complement wushu, it can be very good. Um, Wushu punches have a big problem. Head turns in Wushu have a big problem. It's very hard to be subtle. It's very hard to kind of like find your target in Wushu because it doesn't train for that. I look at stuff like that, right? I look at like where someone's head turns. I find that like, Japanese head turns are really good. Japanese performers like are good at looking places. I don't know why that is. Even actors are good at looking places. I think that sport karate is also kind of like detrimental to that. Sport karate teaches you to kind of snap your head around and not really look at anything in particular. You're sort of pretending you're looking at stuff. That's my curmudgeon answer. Although, like anybody in Hong Kong films who like the best, I think maybe okay, like okay, one of the best is got to be like it's got to be southern like southern Chinese opera. Especially like I mean, you just see it with like the Yun Clan and Jackie and these guys that went to. They did Beijing opera in the south. And Beijing opera in the north is going to be very different because you don't get the kind of like mixture of the hard southern styles, and the southern styles are so far from the capital that they were kind of allowed to be vicious. Look, it's not because of like dense wooded areas, and it's like, I don't buy that, right? I don't buy that. You know, the northern systems were long because you have wider open areas. You have wide open areas in the south too. You have forests in the north too. I don't buy that. I think instead, like when you're closer to the capital in the north, you have to look less like a martial art, right? Because like all the Confucian governments would like crack down on these guys, especially the Qing. Whereas in the south, like you're kind of far from the capital, you're sort of like free to make a militia. So anytime you see a combination of like southern opera combined with anything really, especially taekwondo, like when like that's sort of like this magical combination, or kickboxing, man, like or hapkido, anything. That's probably like the base style, but you have to be raised in it from birth. Yeah, nobody can do that anymore. And they just wouldn't like the entire incentive system for like how and why kids were taught those opera styles is gone. You know, like opera culture is gone. There's no local opera flavor anymore. Southern street fighting, like Choi Foot. Yeah, you know who did Choi Foot was Philip Ko, and that's an example of a guy who like could make anything look good. Philip Ko is just one of the greatest screen fighters of all time. Choi Foot guy combined it with kickboxing and just like wanted to make something look good. Okay, next thing I wanted to talk about. I'm going way over time, but I don't care. There's this movie called The Creator. The creator is Gareth Edwards, not to be confused with Gareth Evans. Gareth Edwards' new film was released last year, and we watched The Creator as a company because we wanted to see the CG, and the CG is very good. There's a lot of beautiful stuff in the movie. The CG is almost too good. Everything else is pretty bad because it sort of is this very, I would call it a low quality commentary on AI. Um, I'm I'm big now on this idea of like low, medium, and high quality theories on things. And what I would say is like a low quality opinion on AI. Like a low quality opinion against AI is it's going to take all of our jobs. Okay, it's kind of true, but it's like there's so many there's so many like ways to falsify that hypothesis. It just doesn't. and it's sort of like emotional, right? And similarly, a low quality opinion in favor of AI would be like AI is going to be like people and it's going to want human rights and we're going to give it to them and they're going to be peaceful. Like that's also low quality, very low quality opinion on AI. And that is this movie. The movie is about and I'll just ruin it. I don't care. You shouldn't see it. This is terrible. And I want people to disagree. It's like, please tell me, give me your best shot. But the story is about a man who's made an AI that's like so realistic and so human. It's obviously artificial general intelligence, AGI. Is that AGI? I don't know. I don't know what the acronym is. I think it's AGI. And it and he's sort of like found a way to combine it with people, right? To like bring humans to like the next level of evolution or something. Um, and Is that true? Wait, no, I'm gonna walk that back. No, he basically, let me walk back that last part. He basically found a way to make AI like superhuman looking and acting. Not superhuman. It has the same strength. It has just as bad aiming with guns. In fact, it's worse at aiming. So here's like the dilemma, right? Here's the dilemma. So a lot of the movie takes place in Thailand, where they're searching for this kid, this like super soldier kid, like the last AI. So the story is about like America has banned AI, which is like another low quality. It's so stupid. Yeah, like it's so stupid. It would be like making a movie about like America. Like imagine a movie in like 1850 where America has banned automation. It's banned the steam engine, right? Can you imagine like how dumb this would be. So, at any rate, in Gareth Edwards' I don't want to call him Gareth Evans. Gareth Edwards' idea is that America is this sort of like McCarthyist police state or whatever, has banned AI, and so no AI is safe in America, right? And like they'll ruthlessly kill the AI, which the first notion, by the way, that like AI should be given human rights with humans is like ridiculous. I'm gonna get killed in the future by some AI that claims to demand human rights, but I'll just stand by it. It's like you're not people. You're just not because you're made by people. So if you in not by like creation, not with procreation, but you're made with tools. Let's call it like it is. You're a computer, right? And a chimp is not a person. That doesn't mean that we should just destroy chimps, but we shouldn't give chimps human rights, right? Because you can't bring a chimp to the witness stand, right? So similarly, like there's a line between AI and humans. Doesn't matter what it looks like, but the movie is trying to push this idea that like, well, maybe AI is people, and I just find this very preposterous. So anyway, and it's equally preposterous that America could outlaw AI. And if you look at America in this movie, America is like it's like kicking ass. It's like it's so high tech. It's got crazy like it's like the airport is crazy now. It's like really high tech stuff, but like nothing's AI. Okay, got it. Well, I'll take it. I mean, so like that's the first part. The first problem is that like horrible America is actually awesome. Second thing is that in Thailand where AI is allowed, they now have AI police. And I wish I had like I'll just pretend that this is a oh here we go I'm gonna pretend this is a gun, right? Like the way that these AI move around is laughable. Like they move around like fidgety stuntmen, right? Like they run around, they're like freeze, freeze, like their aim is like this. It's like this. It look like, and when you like, if I hold this as steady as possible, okay, I'm holding this as steady as possible. Okay, there's some drift, right? So even if I were to really like, I can't hold it steady. Now, if I'm a robot, it should just not move, right? It would theoretically not move. That would be the theory if you have AI as your police. But instead, these police are like, and also their aim's terrible. They keep missing. There are so many things wrong with this movie, but like I have a feeling have a feeling that those characters originally weren't actually supposed to be robots. This is my conspiracy. I could be totally wrong, but like they move like people, and they move like people who are told to move like bad cops. If they were actually robots, you would have thought that Gareth or somebody would have said, "Hey, why don't you like calm down the fidgeting? Because robots don't fidget unless they're so human that they're actually like flawed and kind of don't work very well anymore because their aim's terrible. Like they literally have parts where somebody's running away and the AI is trying to shoot as the person's running away, like serpentine running away, and the AI is like, I can't hit him, I can't hit him. So that's fake. Anyway, I give that movie a very low rating. Um, there's so many things wrong with that movie, but it sort of like speaks to this new um, trend in the culture, which is which is just convinced that, and I talk about this on my website, on my blog a lot. There's this trend that like we're supposed to sort of demean people as much as possible, meaning we shouldn't think of ourselves as special in any way. So if we make AI, then the way that we're supposed to analyze AI is as if AI and people are no different. If we're analyzing chimpanzees, it's sort of like, well, we're supposed to analyze chimpanzees as if we are just animals also. They're just a different kind of animal. Um, and then with um, same thing would be with like just looking at the the outer space, right? If we're supposed to be analyzing outer space, well, we're supposed to be looking at outer space as though we are just space dust. That's what Neil deGrasse Tyson calls us. This is like cosmic space dust or whatever, which Carl Sagan like famously wrote, the pale blue dot about how insignificant the Earth is. And again, this is a trend that everybody's picking up on because I think that everybody thinks that this is a humble way of thinking. Like if I just, well, it's two things, and I'm gonna go deep. So there's a great series of books called The History of Magic and Experimental Science. Lynn Thorndike. Been reading this for almost a year. This is one of 8 books. There are 8 of these. I'm on the 8th one finally after a year. And Copernicus, who basically discovered heliocentrism. Before Copernicus, people thought that Earth was the center of the universe and everything kind of went around it. And their evidence was like, well, if you look up, everything's kind of going by the Earth, right? And they would try and explain like, well, how do those faraway stars? Because like they started getting mathematical about it. They look up and they say, well, how do those stars, like how far away are those stars, and how fast is that thing moving, right? Like if Earth is, and they kind of tried to estimate that the Earth was about like 20, I think they like between 15 and 20,000 miles around. They kind of like started figuring that out before heliocentrism, and they're looking up and they're going, yeah, so if the Earth is that big, then like how fast does that thing have to be going? Right? For it didn't make any sense. And also like right, they're trying to figure out, how it could be that Mars does this and Venus does this, but they're not going at like the same rate. And there's this weird, like they kind of have this, this secondary motion. And so oh, Eric is asking what this has to do with cars. You missed. I'm on something else. I'm on the creator now. I'm talking about humans thinking that they're just computers now. And at any rate, Copernicus had a ton of data, and there was a ton of data at the time, right? There's a ton of data about stars and planets and all this, and the Arabs had collected a lot. And when I say the Arabs, I mean like Arabs from Cordoba, Spain. They're mostly mostly Jewish, I think, too. Like had like really good data on the stars. And they're from Moorish Spain, um, and so he was kind of just like comparing those are the Alphonsine tables, and so he would compare those to what he was looking up at the sky. I mean, yeah, it doesn't really check out. Like you keep on having to like resolve for these secondary motions of planets. And then when you changed it to like, well, what if we try, a heliocentric system? It all kind of fit. And this was what the Catholic Church was hoping and praying for, because they were trying to figure out when Easter was. And Easter comes after, I think it comes after the spring equinox. And they were trying to pin the equinox, and they couldn't do it because they didn't have an accurate calendar yet. Well, finally, with heliocentrism, they could pin the equinox, and they could figure out Easter, and then they could plan the calendar for the next 1,000 years, right? That was like a big deal. Because every now and then they would find that, like, the equinox isn't when we thought it was, and it's actually like 3 days ago. Like, well, let's stop doing leap years for 10 years or something. They do this stuff. What a nightmare before you had a calendar. Crazy. So anyway, Copernicus is the one that looked up and said, like, what if the sun is the center of the universe, right? And so the popular myth that we like to, and by the way, Copernicus was not like censored for this, not anywhere near as much as Galileo. By the time of Galileo, it's sort of been accepted. Um, the history of censorship has like a lot of interesting, like turns and twists, and the Inquisition, for example. It tended to kind of censor things on a personal level. It was like a lot of the time it even wasn't even like that theological a lot of the time. Basically, if you question the resurrection, or if you question free will, that's when you ran into problems. But like the problem with theology and with science at the time is that they were trying to square Aristotelian. Eric's gonna ding me for this, but the Aristotelian idea of the spheres, right, which holds Earth at the center, which also held that like these spheres influence human agency on Earth. So, like, if you commit a crime, like maybe the stars made you do it, right? And so you could sort of use astrology to, you know, blame the stars for your bad behavior. They're trying to square that, which, like, Aristotle was held as king in the medieval church, even though he wasn't Christian. He was held as king. And his work was the stuff that like made the rounds. Like he was the most cited of any, aside from the Bible itself. Might have been more than the Bible. I have no idea. But so you try and square that with free will. Because like with free will, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're influenced by the stars, but you're not. Uh, so there's some kind of middle ground there. So they have had all these weird ways of like justifying that. Anyway, that book is that book series goes through that, and it's hilarious. What they, he describes it as riding two horses at the same time and kind of like going from one to the other. uh, so with Copernicus, the 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 way that that story goes down in history is that Copernicus looked up at the heavens and he thought, well, what if we're not the center of the universe? What if humans are not as special? What if Earth is not as special as we've made it out to be? Why don't we look at the sun, which is like possibly more special, or maybe that's more central to life, right? And then that's how he found heliocentrism. I, that doesn't seem to be the case. He wasn't thinking at all about whether or not Earth was special. In fact, when he came up with heliocentrism, that was the moving Earth. Well, then that just factored into astrology for him. Like he never wrote an astrological book, but his student wrote about Copernicus's astrology, how it was based on the motion of the Earth. So Copernicus definitely held Earth as special. He definitely held people as special. He wasn't thinking that humans are just space dust. He didn't say that Earth is insignificant, unless he did. Like, feel free to quote me if I'm wrong. But this idea that Copernicus was just this humble figure, I don't think is true. I think he held Earth to be just as superior as anyone during the time. I think he held humans to be just as special as anybody. And yet, the way he went down in history is as this man who dared question the um, the mainstream view. Which, by the way, like there had already been theories about a moving Earth. There had already been theories of heliocentrism. They just hadn't proven it yet, right? And nobody lashed out really against him. He lived, basically free of censure for the most part. It was Galileo who got it bad later on. And so this idea that in order to find scientific truth, you have to abandon the idea that humans have a privileged perspective on reality. That is what came hundreds of years later from this like retcon of Copernicus's idea. And so what does that mean? So and the thing too is that, and this is called the Copernican principle. You can look it up on Wiki. And the Copernican principle only came about like 100 years ago. And the Copernican principle, and I can read it to you verbatim, but it was also the, let me read it for you right now. In physical cosmology, the Copernican principle states that humans on the Earth or in the solar system are not privileged observers of the universe, that observations from the Earth are representative of observations from the average position in the universe. Named for Copernican heliocentrism and his working assumption that arises from a modified cosmological extension of Copernicus' argument of a moving Earth. Um, and so this is like, on its face, that's harmless. On its face, it's like, yeah, it actually doesn't make sense to view the universe from an Earth's perspective. It's gonna make your data just be screwy. But like, if you were to take like the History Channel angle of Copernicus, of the Copernican principle, then what that says is that Copernicus thought that people weren't special, and so there's a point that confirmed this, which is Darwin's natural selection, uh, which was which was a confirmation of the Copernican principle, which was what? That humans are just another animal species. We reproduce just like animals. We have the same sexual characteristics. We have the same everything, including the same violence. And Darwin even went as far as saying that human language is just like an extension. It's different in degree only from animal communication. Right. So Darwin sort of turned the Copernican principle into this, what I think is kind of a religious sentiment. Because why is it religious? Well, think about it. First of all, it's a cosmology. The cosmology states that humans are not special, come from dirt. Um, we're just atoms, just like any element, right? Just like any molecules. All animals are basically the same as us. And so it is this sort of like cosmological understanding of the universe and humans' place within it. And it also, dovetails nicely into the idea that like humans are destroying the planet, right? So it's very compatible with viewpoints about, climate change and whatever it's going to be, or even like, what is it, antinatalism? I mean, people who think that people should stop having children, plays very well into those viewpoints, right? Um, and so, and it also would play into, conservationists too, because a lot of conservationists who are on the other side of the political aisle think that we should be stewards of creation, and if humans would just stop mucking it up, then we could make a difference in the world. Um, Although they're a little bit less aligned with the Copernican principle. But anyway, so this idea of the Copernican principle has been running the sciences for a long time. It's been sort of the founding idea behind everything that we know or we think we know about language and violence. And you see it at work in something like The Creator, where if we were to just humble ourselves into realizing that we work just like computers do, our brain is just, it's just electricity, right? It's just, you know, different bits communicating with each other. There might be some analog features missing from computer chips, but we're making computer chips that are analog now using actual neurological tissue. It's kind of scary stuff if you ask me, but this idea that like we're getting closer and closer to this idea that, well, as if we're getting closer and closer to making uh, systems, making machines that are just like human, right? And so the other aspect of this is this idea that whoever can maintain the most humble position within Copernican, the Copernican principle, then you're sort of like the most monkish. You're sort of the most like uh, you're like the most holy in a sense, right? Because like who more than the scientist who only lives for the truth, is like, who can be more humble than that, right? And that scientist thinks that, people are just garbage, and he just goes and he just tries to observe reality. We give a lot of attention to these guys. You listen to any scientist in the mainstream, and at some point they'll talk about humility, right? And how humans need to be humbled. And a lot of the time, this is just a direct attack against, Christians, Jews, Muslims, etc. But I think a lot of the time it is like this, like, very, heartfelt belief that the more that we view ourselves as, dirt, ones and zeros, animals, etc., then like the closer we can get to scientific truth. I believe that this is leading us very far astray from understanding language, because the Copernican principle has turned up nothing regarding the origin of language. It's been a big failure. Okay, so that's the creator. I was going to talk about Planet of the Apes. I don't think I have time. I'll do it next time. Sorry. That's actually I think that'd be a whole action thoughts episode. Take some questions real quick. Um, Yeah, so Davina says the Copernican model displaced a geocentric model of Ptolemy that had prevailed for centuries, which had placed Earth at the center of the universe. Yeah. Um, it's reductionist to treat people like meat puppets. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, again, like, you could really see it from both ways, right? Like, if you were to treat people like meat puppets, on the one hand, you could call that person a totalitarian, but then he might turn around and say, "No, I'm just saying what we are. I'm just humbling us." And the thing about these guys who claim to be humble in their scientific view of the world, in their non-privileged view of the world, is that, like, if they can reduce everybody else to being meat puppets, and they claim to be meat puppets too, well, okay, well, then your merit is entirely based on your scientific achievements, right? And if that person's scientific achievements are this, then, like, he's automatically, or she's automatically up here now. So it is just this, like, it's just this silly. Um, I think it's kind of silly. And you see it in the creator, and you see it in Planet of the Apes too, but I'll get into that next time. The original five. I haven't seen the new ones, so maybe I should watch the new ones first before I talk about them. Okay. All right. And then, all right, last thing I want to talk about, two things actually. So first thing is, I've made a new YouTube channel. It exists right now. It's called Unoptimized Evolution. And so it's just at Unoptimized Evolution. And I hope you'll go and subscribe, because I'll talk about this stuff a lot more there. Um, and I did this because I was posting a lot of, I post a lot of, like, essays and whatnot, and I don't think people are very interested. Right? I think a lot of people come to this channel for tech-in, for action breakdowns. I'm not even sure people are coming for the podcasts, but I'll keep doing those on this channel, I think. But all the anthropology and research stuff I'm going to take over to the other channel, which means on these streams I'm not going to be doing that anymore, right? This is like the last time I'm going to talk about this, I promise. So, so if you want to see more stuff like this, go to Unoptimized Evolution, subscribe there, and I'll try and just stick to action essays, martial arts, Tekken, um, and the book is coming along swimmingly, meaning I keep on reading, unfortunately. I'm still trying to cook through like 600 pages a week of reading, which is really hard, but um, the theory is kind of getting to the point where I have to fill a lot of holes. One of those holes is making sure that I fully understand animal communication systems, because I'm making the claim that animals don't speak, that animals don't have, like, human grammatical language. I'm making that claim. I'm making the claim that that animals also don't have recursive object-based aggression, right? I'm saying that those are human specialties, and they're connected. They make a loop, right? And that allows for language. That's the theory. And the use of that language self-domesticates. I think also the use of language with animals domesticates animals, as animals sort of try and reach to understand what we're talking about with them, because they also know that we're the apex predator, and yet we're using language with them. So I think that the domestication that we see with animals is a product of our usage of language on them. I don't think it's just us keeping them safe from predators and whatnot, because we're the predators. Like, they're not stupid. They know exactly. I think that they know pretty much, like, okay, if you don't get with the program, you're done. I think they know that. Um, Even cattle know. I talk to anybody who operates a cattle, the the piston that you kill cattle with. Like, they know exactly what's going on. Um, and it's not that they're human smart. It's just, they are smart enough to know, like, when they're in danger. They're smart enough to know who the apex predator is, right? And I don't think that they have any idea that there could be like a benevolent um, caretaker, right? I think that, like, once domestication really sets in, like, maybe they can settle in. But anyway, so this means I have to study domestication now. I don't know anything about domestication. If I want to make this cogent, I have to study this. You're a mocap artist and you haven't watched the new Apes movies. Nope. I will. Just haven't been interested because I don't know. Like, you tell me. Go ahead and spoil it if you want. But is it not kind of saying the same thing that I've been talking about, which is humans and apes? If we just give apes a chance, like, they'll become uh, anthropologically intelligent. You know, because it is kind of the angle taken from the first 5 films, which is that, our domestic animals died, and we adopted apes as our new domestic animals, and they evolved language, like human level language. And for some reason, humans, like, lost language. I mean, such a bizarre way of thinking, but it is predicated on this, like, old standard model of a very Copernican thinking. So if the new movies, throw a wrench into that, then cool. But otherwise, I kind of know what to expect. Uh, yeah. So there's nothing, like, very surprising that comes out of Hollywood anymore, because they all kind of think this way. There's very little diversity of thought in within, like, high level entertainment circles, right? They're all kind of driven by this same mode of thinking, which, it's like, which is interesting to think about, because, like, who would you say has the most power in the world? Um, I would argue that it's whoever has control over the nukes at this point. How do we make a nuke? Particle physics, new physics. Right? It's not like we made the nuke when we found physics. Right? Nuclear fission was around before that. Nuclear fission wasn't the most important thing in the world. When it made a nuke, nuclear fission is the most important thing in the world now. So, because nukes basically determine everything, and of course there's, like, cascading things underneath nukes, but nukes are up here, right? That's, like, the thing that everybody talks about whenever a gun gets fired, whenever a fist gets thrown, right? Whenever somebody punches somebody, like, that's down here. At some point, it can work itself up here. And we all know this, like, intrinsically. Like, it can get there, right? The shot heard around the world, right? Or Franz Ferdinand getting assassinated, right? One gunshot can trigger 20 million deaths. So, okay, so, like, what is that apex predator now above us? If we just think about it for a second, it's nukes. So, if nukes are the most important thing, what is the language of nukes? What's the scientists and, like, physics language, right? Which is a very powerful language. I wouldn't be surprised if AI, like, if AI creates something. Well, I don't know if AI is going to make it. It's probably going to be somebody using AI. I really do think that somebody using AI makes something that, like, dwarfs Hiroshima, dwarfs the nuclear weapons. Right? If somebody does that, then whatever the programming language is that made that thing, that's going to become the new highest status thing. Right? So computer scientists will be like the new thing. But right now it's like physicists, right? So anybody in Hollywood is going to naturally sort of suck up to these physicists, and they're going to kind of adopt this very, you know, this very kind of Copernican thinking, because physicists, I'm sorry, they don't know where language comes from. And none of them are able to differentiate between human and chimp combat. They can't do it. It blows my mind. It's the simplest thing in the world. Apes, apes have this when it comes to combat. Humans have this. It's very, very, very different. It's not just a knife, it's any object for combat. Apes don't have it. Apes do not have objects for combat. They have intimidation with objects, which gets close, but it's not close enough. They have objects for predation. They have objects for breaking nuts, but they cannot use an object in combat. That fundamentally changes the relationship between apes. Right? Once you introduce object-based combat, or recursive object-based aggression, as I call it, which is what humans have, then that makes like a that is not the same relationship between people anymore. That is like an ongoing crisis. It's like an ulcer that will not heal because you never know what the violence is going to be. Right? And as soon as there's a new technology, it might be that. That might be the new weapon. So language has to update. So this idea that we're just apes, it's like it's coming down from up here. It blows my mind. Blows my mind that they have this wrong, and it's why they don't understand violence. And yet they have like the nuke. Just saying. So I did want to talk about AI briefly because it's always in the news, and I'm not gonna give like your. I'm gonna try and give a high quality AI overview. But before I go into AI, let me just take a few more questions. Um, Haunter Park says they don't have the dark humor. See, that was the thing about apes is that like they were fun, right? Yeah, all of them, or even four, which is dark, right, with like student riots. It's like looks like they're still having fun doing this, you know? It's like there's a very clear proxy as to what's going on, you know? Vietnam War protests and apes protesting. It was fun. And then even like the villain in number three, man. Oh my gosh, like the greatest villain because he was so rational. He was so he made so much sense. Everything he said made perfect sense. And he's the bad guy, right? Like I don't know if you're gonna be able to top that one. Number three is like amazing. Even though I totally disagree with the sort of like thought kernel behind it, I still can acknowledge that those are great films. Uh, Watched Apollo 11 recently. This is Davina again. Every arms race involves a massive investment to outpace the competition. Well, yeah, that's Roba. That's exactly what you do. You try and one up the other person's violence, and that like that that field of anticipation between the antagonists, which could just be literally two people with their fingers over buttons, as it was with the Soviet Union, as it kind of is now. Uh, that that field of aggression between the antagonists never closes with people. With animals, it sort of closes once you're out of the proximity of like another animal. Now we can't exactly know what's going on in a chimp's brain, but probably a good chance that they're not thinking about combat all the time. I could be wrong, but even when they are, like combat's a very simple endeavor for a chimp. With humans, it's always open. Again, I call it an ulcer, and it just like so the ulcer of ROBA, recursive object-based aggression, means that we never know what the other person's violence is going to be unless we have perfect information, which we can't get. We're always anticipating that they're thinking the same thing, and vice versa. That ulcer is constantly trying to heal itself by passing language into the equation to try and reduce violence to get away from combat, right? That way, the hierarchy, instead of it being a clash like with animals, is very like it's a very stable system. I call it optimized because the animals are actually optimized for each other's weapons. When you have an optimized scenario, optimized combat loop with animals, then they clash and then you have a hierarchy, right? And then you might challenge, you'll clash, and oh, you have a new hierarchy, right? And then you're about to clash, one backs down, okay, you have the hierarchy again. There's only really two ways to have a hierarchy. right? Either you clash or one backs down. It's one or the other. That's how you make a hierarchy. Keep in mind, animals rarely die doing this. It's very rare for an animal to die in a clash against its own because the weapons are sort of designed for themselves. So it's like really hard to do that, right? Chimps mob. They might kill a chimp every now and then, but that it takes days for that chimp to die. With objects, it's very different. You have a rock, you smash a head, it's over. It's like it's night and day difference, right? And both could die, right? So in the roba combat loop scenario, both can die. And that violence can spread. That's why everybody in the periphery is like, don't fight, don't fight, don't fight. Because if that spreads, if everybody starts throwing rocks, now we got a rock party. Don't want that, right? That's how you get feuds. That's how you get wars. Starts from an interpersonal conflict and it blows up into a feud and it goes into a civil war. Everybody knows this intrinsically about Roba because it's an ulcer and it never closes. There's nothing you can do to close it. All you can do is create language, right? I call it parsing. You throw signals into that combat loop. You see what sticks, and then that signal, whatever signal sticks, that takes the hierarchy. That signal, that word, now has a hierarchy to it. And I think that that's how you get grammatical language. Could be totally wrong, but that's the book. I just gave it away. Um, okay, so I'll talk briefly about AI. Outtrigger asks, do you think AGI will be violent towards other AGI someday? Okay, that actually touches on the point I want to make, which is that AI doesn't use language. That is not a language model. Um, it is a signaling model. It can copy, right? It can interpret, but it is not a language model. To call it a language model is to grossly misrepresent what language is. They did this when they taught this chimp called named Washo, and I think there was another one, Kiko. They taught these chimps sign language, meaning the chimps learned 500 signs. Well, that's not sign language, people. Just because you can do a sign doesn't mean that's sign language. Sign language has grammar. There's inflection. There's conjugation. There's a you know there are there's so much grammar to sign language, and yet chimps that learn sign language don't do the grammar. So it's not sign language. We have this tendency, again, it's this Copernican idea that like, well, chimps, we just got to give them the benefit of the doubt. What they're doing is close enough. It's sign language. It's not. It's not sign language. I think like you'd offend people who actually sign if you were to call that sign language, because sign language has grammar. Theirs did not. They couldn't organize signs into a meaningful hierarchy. Remember what I said? Roba creates a merge field, which when you put a signal into it, the signal takes that hierarchy and adopts it as its own hierarchy. That's how you get grammatical pieces, right? So you get nouns that are like hierarchically like situated somewhere in the grammar, as are verbs and adverbs and these words and they change over time, right? We shouldn't expect that this stays the same. But this is language. This is language, and you don't have to teach kids language. Kids just they have what Chomsky calls a language acquisition device. They sort of like listen a lot. They put it all in there. They try and organize where it goes. They try things. That doesn't work. They put things together. And by 3, you've kind of figured out like basic grammar. And by the time you're 7, you figured out grammar. Now you can make an infinite number of sentences. Okay, that's crazy. It's crazy to then compare that to say that that is the same as ChatGPT. It's not. ChatGPT is a predictive interpreter based on statistics. That is not language, right? ChatGPT cannot make an infinite variety of language of sentences. It also can't make a generative can't it doesn't have like a universal grammar that works the same as a human universal grammar. Like if you were to take a ChatGPT core, whatever that is, right? If you were to program it with some kind of like core language acquisition device that's the same as a child's, and you just fed it words and sentences all the time, if you just fed it sentences, how would it know what a proper sentence is? And how could it try that, right? Because with children, they have a feedback loop. With adults, right? Because a kid will try, they'll try things based on the grammar, which is like, I put it on my headphones, right? Because they've heard ed at the end of past tense verbs. I walked, I puttered, um, and they say I put it on my headphones. You say, oh, that's cute, but it's put. I put on my headphones. Like, oh, then they file that away as an irregular, right? They have that feedback and they figure it out very quickly. But then what that allows them to do, it's not that they just memorize that rule. It's that now that they've made that rule, that goes into their theory of language, and it can apply to everything, right? So when they say, "Oh, I put on my headphones," so I sat, and they kind of like start putting like a very complex theory of the language together, and that is what human grammar is. It's a personal theory of the language that you're hearing. And it just so happens that those theories tend to line up within a given linguistic group. If they don't line up, then like somebody's wrong, right? Somebody's grammar is wrong. You have to write a grammar book, or you have two different languages, right? Like Steven Pinker's book, Language Instinct. It's got this great part where he talks about what does he call it? Like Black American English. I can't remember what he wrote, but it's like it has its own grammar. It's not just garbled words and whatnot. It's like it actually has a grammar and it has rules to it. Redneck grammar has the same thing. Like redneck grammar has like its own. We didn't do nothing here. We ain't doing nothing wrong. That's not standard English, but there is a rule for making that kind of sentence, right? So you have a feedback mechanism to test that stuff as a child, and a child growing up within that system is going to adopt that grammar and then maybe adopt another grammar over here, code switch between the two, etc. So AI models don't do this. This is not how they work. They try and mimic that, but it's always going to be like based in some kind of predictive interpreter, right? That's not what people do. Uh, and so what you have to do with AI is you have to force feed it thousands and millions, billions probably of pages and text uh, in order to have it know kind of like what language looks like, right? And then it trains that by asking curators and whatnot. And you test it and you sort of set guardrails and all this and you sort of set it on its right course. Okay, that's all good except that language changes every day. So you have to like force feed it new stuff all the time. And you have to then demonstrate that like this way of talking is more correct than it was before now in these situations, but not in these. How do you teach that? You can't teach that to AI. Right? All it can kind of do is like estimate based on the date of publication and all this, right? So if you actually wanted to make an AI that that could generate grammar, right? Could actually generate language like a child. Because a child really is like a language generation organism. And it's incredible if you raise kids and you see how they take it in and how they process it and how it comes out and the mistakes they make are very logical mistakes and you correct them and they try and like figure out like okay well then they don't really fight you too much on when they get corrected, or if they do then you're going to have to explain the irregularity. So if you actually wanted to make a proper language model with AI, you would actually have to start with what I would call the unoptimized scenario, where you have to start with your two combatants who have ROBA and don't know what the weapon of the other is. Create that merge field. You have to simulate the merge field. You have to simulate throwing signals into that, which adopts that recursive kind of like hierarchy, and like it pops out a word, right? And then it pops out, and then from all those words, you basically have a grammar. So if you did that and you ran a simulation and you just compared it to like every grammar on the planet, well, as long as it could match a grammar, then you would basically have like a merge field simulator. That would be far closer, and it would probably be thousands of times more efficient. Um, so in theory, like, I mean, a great way to test this is if you made a an, what I would call like an unoptimized logic, unoptimized logic interface, for example, right? Where it's just a blank slate, right? And you set up, one computer over here, or even like an emulator, and then a computer and emulator over here. Both of them are fearful that the other is going to kill them, and maybe that can happen. right? Like maybe there's a way, and I don't know how you program that, but it's closer than what's currently happening, right? You program them with the fear of God, basically the fear of death, right? And they don't want to fight. And then every time they manage to not fight and they subsume their fighting under some kind of common term that adopts the hierarchy, then save that term and just run the simulation a billion times. And like, how much processing power would that take? Um, it might not take that much, or it might take way more. I have no idea. But then what you would do then is like, as soon as you spit out like a 500, if you spit out a language that has like 4,000 words in it, right? And you sort of extrapolate a grammar from that, then you would then compare that grammar to like, 7,000 languages and all their grammars, and you just kind of find the one where it's closest, and then that's the one that, um, then that's your model. Be a simulation of game theory. Yeah, kind of. I mean, it is, but like, how do you actually see? You can program it to act like a person who's scared, but you can't program it to be scared, right? Because that is the foundation of human combat and language, I believe. The foundation of it is the fear of death and the fear of anticipate, the fear of like uncertainty of the combat loop. Um, and then that generates grammar. That generates the words that have grammatical hierarchies attached to them. um, Outrigger says for trivial small bits of code, it can write decently well, but you need a human who understands things at a higher level. Senior team members can't be replaced. Less juniors might be needed than before, though. Like the thing too about all of these AI models is that they're they don't just like let them go. They don't just like feed them a bunch of data and say, okay, well, this is the AI model. They're constantly putting guardrails up against it. And like, I mean, what happened the other day on YouTube? And YouTube's algorithm has probably got a lot of AI going behind the scenes. Now I put something on YouTube about book titles for this book, and like one of the book titles is like violence and language, and I had all these comments. I had a lot of comments from a lot of you, and then I went on there a few days later, and they're all gone. I don't know what's going on, but it's probably a similar theme that we're going to keep seeing, which is that things that are run by AI are constantly being like tweaked. Google also released this kind of creepy uh, note about like, uh, if I say this, is it gonna like ban me? Who knows? Let's give it a shot. So it sent out this memo about sensitive information, or like sensitive topics. So like presumably if something really sensitive is going on in the world, like out there, like probably most likely not in your backyard, out there, right? And it attaches some keywords to it, like like pistol. There I go. I'm getting banned. I know I'm gonna get banned. Um, these words, right? And it's going to attach these keywords, and it's going to sort, and it's going to look through everything and find instances of those. And it just has been like applying this blunt force censorship over these terms. Doing it on Instagram too, from what I understand. So now we don't have a right to like not be censored by these things. Just get off of them if it's bothering us. Um, I'm hoping that by starting the new channel, like it'll understand that like the things that I'm talking about are actually relevant. Well, we'll see. It'll be interesting. All right, take another couple questions, and I'm gonna go. So I gotta deal with tax stuff. People constantly refer to the algorithm, but nobody knows what the algorithm is, even the people running the things. Yeah, we're just at the beginning. So, and like I said too, I mean, I think that we're just gonna keep seeing AI taking over very mundane processes like prosecution and finding out if people have been using your copyright. Um, yeah, I wrote a blog post about like here's a fun AI script you could write. Okay, so in America, you can copyright choreography. you could presumably copyright a dance. And you could presumably copyright part of that dance, right? Like if it's very unique, you could copyright that. Okay, so get the 3D motion capture data of that dance, right? You can just run like motion capture video tracking software, right? You can just like get the skeleton from that. It's very quick and easy, right? Okay, so now you've got like your skeleton. It's this like 5 second dance thing, right? Okay, so now you've got that. Okay, then what you can do is search for all instances of that piece of movement within 20% in anything on YouTube, and then ding them all for copyright and send out scary, scary legal letters to every one of them. Um, what about this? You could probably copyright. You could probably copyright a gesture if you know what you're doing. So let's say you manage to copyright like a library of gestures or a library of affects, right? Like little fidgets and things that are particular to you. Okay, so copyright those, file them with the Copyright Office. Somebody's gonna do this. File them with the Copyright Office. Okay, now go and do a search for all those. Do the same thing, and now search for that within 20%, and then just ding all those for copyright. I guarantee you'll make thousands of dollars just from people who are afraid, who are like, I didn't even know I was using it. It's like, yeah, well, I'm happy to settle for 1,800. Will you pay that? Otherwise, you're talking about $250,000, 6 months in prison. People will pay. It sucks, but that's probably the world we're going into. Uh, Famous streamer named Nick Fuentes was also banned on YouTube, Twitch, and Instagram. Moved his followers to Rumble and Odyssey. Yeah, didn't that guy defend Hitler or something? Not so sure about that guy. The problem is that the black box, you can know what goes in and what comes out. You have no idea what happened inside, right? Which is like that's like an executable. Like if your software is not open source, then like that also works the same way. Um, but when it affects tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, uh, then yeah, you are talking about something that's like a little bit scarier. Yeah, Fortnite got in trouble for stealing dances. Yeah, that's you can kind of see why they did it though, right? Because that's what all of us do. So I really think that copyright law needs to change. I don't know if that's going to happen. Like they need to copyright. They need to change copyright laws. I was saying this during the Napster era where, these like housewives were getting sued for $2 million for sharing 5 songs, right? Which is like blatant human sacrifice. Trying to make an example, right? A far more productive course of action would have been to change copyright law, make enforcement easy, right? Give enforcement authority to ISPs and colleges. Colleges kind of did this, right? Like some colleges would ding you a couple $100 for like because basically if you were doing Napster in college, right, over the network there, this is in the 2000s, ancient history, and late 90s. If you're using their network to use Napster, then like the college would get busted. They would be the ones responsible. But then they could trace it to you, obviously, and they'd go to you and they basically be like, look, we've had to deal with this legal situation. We have to hire lawyers, so we're gonna ding you 200 or 300 bucks per violation. Now that's way more productive than randomly picking a housewife and dinging her for 2 million bucks. Because I think that if everybody kind of knows that they're going to get dinged for 200 bucks for using Napster or torrents or whatever, then I think that that would have been a more productive way to stop piracy. Of course, there's also the argument that you know a lot of this led to streaming, um, which is like highly lucrative now, but like it's also predicated on ads. Like I kind of, much as I love free music, um, I pay YouTube Red to not see advertisements. I pay good money to never see an advertisement. And everybody here should too. Get rid of ads as much as possible. They're evil. If there's an evil in the world, it's advertisements. And like that's the model now, which is like, okay, at least you can pay a monthly fee, but like the alternative would have been we just kind of stick to buying albums. Maybe the albums would have gotten cheaper, by the way, because like CDs were on the way out anyway. Right? Remember we were doing mini discs at the time. Nobody's buying mini discs. So it's like you were in this weird place where like CDs are still 20 bucks. It's like super expensive and you don't know if it's going to be good. Like you get like a fastball. Remember those guys? Was it fastball? I can't remember the fast. I can't remember their name, but they had like the whole album was predicated on their one single, and a lot of the time that's how he sold an album was on like one song, and the other nine are terrible. So we were in this weird place at the time anyway. So it's like maybe it would have like caused a different incentive structure if we had just changed copyright laws. But anyway, whatever. It's an alternative history that's not worth pondering anymore. Um, oh, Joseph is here. Joseph Lee? I don't know. You just have a red image. I assume it's Joseph Lee. Hey, Joseph. Or if you're not Joseph Lee, hi, Joseph. Anyway, um, people are willing to pay a fair price for things they want. Nobody agrees on what fair prices is. Yeah, this is like why these artists will give away an album for like they'll say name your price. Remember Humble Bundle? I don't know if they still do Humble Bundles, but like you could pay what you want. It's donationware. We were going this way, guys. We were going towards open source donationware in the 90s anyway, right? We were going that way. And uh, yeah, I don't know. I think the copyright laws just need to change. I keep saying this, and it seems impossible to do, but um, so all right. Thank you all for tuning in. I enjoy doing this. Um, maybe we can. Yeah, Humble Bundle's still around. Cool. And Humble's a good company too. They publish Midnight Fight Express, and they're good people, man. I like them. I'm pro Humble. Copernicus would be proud of their humility. Uh, all right. So yeah, let's do this again. Maybe I don't know. I would like to do these like a little bit more regularly, especially since the podcasts are gonna kind of dry up soon, and maybe do occasional action breakdowns. Just talk about films. I think on here I'll stick to talking films. I'll take AI to the other channel. So all of you who like AI stuff and language, um, I'll give you the channel name. It's again, it's unoptimized evolution. Go to that channel and subscribe, and I will put all of the language and violence up there that you could ever hope for. I'm also going to release the first video. I'm going to try and get it done today. Um, and yeah, here I'll just kind of stick to commentary. All right, thanks everyone. Make sure you, what do they say? Smash that subscribe and like that bell.